You need to know there's a community out here who loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. I wrote that about 3.5 years ago. We just finished recording our first episode, and I knew I needed an outro of some kind. I was in a pretty bad place at that point in my life. I was stuck at a job where I couldn't be myself, was living in a house with a relative who would never truly accept me as the person I am. I was in the process of turning my life completely and utterly upside down, and I decided I needed to do something. I had some recording equipment, I had a lot to say, and I was starting to make enough friends that I thought I might be able to make something of this whole podcasting thing. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was welcomed with open arms into this amazing community of podcasters. They've taught me so much about podcasting, about friendship, and about life. I even met the girl I'd eventually marry. I've gotten to travel to both coasts of the United States and lots of places in between, and I've been deeply, deeply changed by the people I've met and the things I've gotten to experience on this journey. About 6 months later, I started a Patreon page. I've been utterly overwhelmed by the support. It's enabled me to tell stories I would have never otherwise gotten to tell. At the end of the day, that's what it's about for me, giving people space to tell their stories and be heard. So many people deserve that and never get it. And I try to give back. I do journals and we do Google Hangouts, and I've been able to share more of myself with my patrons, and I'm so grateful for all of it. But as a special thank you, I'm doing a thing. I've had so many people tell me since the beginning of the show that the words in the outro mean so much to them, and they mean a lot to me too. So as a way to say thank you, anyone who's been a patron of the show at any level and still is today is going to get a poster with those words printed on it. And for the next 2 weeks, anyone who joins us at the $2 level or higher will get one too. This is a limited time offer. I'll never print this exact design again or for anyone else. Maybe I'll do something else with the outro later and sell it to whoever wants it, but this exact design is a one-time thing. If you're interested in this, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a $2 or higher pledge to get the poster. And check out the other levels while you're there. $4 gets a monthly hangout and discussion group, and $10 gets you a handwritten postcard and picture each month. Thank you all so much for being a part of this journey. I have so much to share with you in the coming months, and I can't wait. Oh, and while I'm at it, Bryn and Anna both increased their pledges this week. I am super, super grateful to both of you. Thank you so much. I love you all. Mwah. This week's episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto contains discussions of sex, sex work, sex trafficking, and some general United States fuckery surrounding those topics. Take care of yourselves, friends. Hello, dear friends. My name is Callie Wright, and this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you follow me on social media at all, you might notice that I've been pretty miffed lately about some of the things that Patreon has been doing. To recap, after our episode about TERFs, my Patreon page was marked as adult content, and what this means is that it was not searchable on the Patreon site. You had to type the URL directly into your browser to get to it. And because of the way credit card payment processing works, it also meant that my payout was delayed. And this seems pretty shady, right? We do an episode about TERFs, and then a trans woman's podcast gets marked as adults only. It'd be pretty easy to see a connection between those two things, but the truth is, I'm not sure I'm on the TERFs radar, to be honest. I don't get the kind of hate some other trans women do online, so I'm honestly not even sure these folks know I exist. So as much as it seemed like there might be something nefarious going on, after doing some thinking, it was probably just because the word pussy was in the show notes. Now, it's only fair for me to point out that between the time I recorded this interview and the day of release here, Patreon did get me taken care of. I was able to manually pay myself out, and someone reviewed my page and removed the adult content flag. So they did do the right thing here. It still took them too long and caused way too much stress on my part. It's just important to know that as you listen to today's interview, Patreon did do the right thing, and all is mostly well, aside, again, from the fact that it took so damn long. Anyways, I was out in the Baltimore area to interview a friend of mine for this other podcast project I'm doing. I brought this up in conversation, and lo and behold, she actually happened to know what was going on with all of this. And it's far, far bigger than podcasts and how we monetize podcasts. Her name is Shannon Nebo, and she's one of the creators of the website Fetsie.com, which we'll talk more about later on. But because of her experience with Fetsie and with sex work in general, she actually knows what's going on here.
The piece of legislation that is causing your problems is referred to as SESTA/FOSTA. And what that has to do with is sex trafficking, and what the government is trying to do to not enable trafficking anymore. So SESTA stands for Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, which is genius, right? And that sounds like it would be a good thing.
Super creative, yes.
Right.
A thing we can all get behind, hopefully.
Yes. It sounds like it would be a good idea because, sex trafficking is bad. But what has happened is that they've made it harder for adult content to exist, kind of in the light, as it were, on a site called Backpage. A lot of sex workers advertise there, and there's all different kinds of sex work. There's legal sex work and there's illegal sex work, and everybody would advertise there for their various services. Now, in sex trafficking, people would advertise for their victims, but not as often as you would think. So I'm not exactly sure, and many sex workers are baffled by this, because the Department of Justice itself was not for this act. But Trump's very smart, so, of course this happened. So what can happen is the government can hold platforms accountable for user content. So, and this is why there's been a lot of censoring across the board. So, and this happened with Backpage. Some people went to jail because they were able to hold them accountable for content on Backpage, for ads that were linked back to sex traffickers. Now, again, seems like it would be a good idea. However, what has happened is that there's been a lot of censorship added. And so you're kind of like caught up in the riptide, a victim of all this, even though you have no idea what SESTA is or was, probably had no idea it was even happening as it was happening.
Yeah, and I can imagine someone listening to this and thinking like, okay, this all makes sense. How does this affect the podcast that I listen to, right? And I've sent Patreon support an email over 20 days ago at this point and haven't gotten a response. So the real answer is that I don't know. And it happened to be when we did an episode about TERFs. And so the timing was really suspicious. But after doing some thinking, I really just think it's because the word pussy was in the show notes, right?
Pussy.
Right. And so they marked it as adult content because they're very trigger happy on marking things as adult content because they think they can be held responsible for all of this. And so they're just taking any account that has any hint of this stuff and saying, well, we're just going to treat that like adult content. And there is no delineation between like, it's adult content because they say cuss words or it's adult content because it's sexual. And like, there's nothing wrong with either of those things, but they aren't the same thing and they're being treated as if they're the same thing. And that's how we got kind of caught in the crossfire.
Yes. And it's kind of a common trend across a lot of platforms. Facebook, like their algorithms have changed. They've cracked down on nudity. There's algorithms now to catch that stuff, whereas before they relied on reporting. They don't do that anymore because they don't want to get their ass in a sling. And because this is such new legislation, the platforms don't know how it's going to be applied. And because the wording of it is so vague, they don't know how it's going to be applied. And it's created a lot more problems than it's solved because sex workers now cannot advertise on these platforms anymore, but also they can't screen on these platforms anymore. So it's become a lot more difficult for sex workers to figure out which clients are safe, which clients are not, because a lot of platforms got shut down. Not just censorship across the board, but some platforms were shut down, including pages specifically for sex workers to talk about their clients, both the good and the bad. Additionally, they've made it a lot harder for law enforcement to actually catch sex traffickers because they're going to keep doing it. But now they're going to take it deeper underground. It's going to be just harder to track it.
Yeah. Well, so it's the same idea with prohibition, right? Like the more taboo you make a thing, the further you drive it underground and the harder it becomes to track it, regulate, know what's going on with it. And I remember hearing about these laws when they happened because I have some friends who are sex workers, but also just lots of people who are very like generally aware of things that affect folks who are sex workers because that's, it should be seen as a legit occupation as anything else in our society. It's obviously not. And I remember people talking about this legislation so first of all, it's bad. And second of all, it's not even going to do like what its stated purpose is. And it's just so bizarre that it's catching all of this other stuff in the crossfire too. Were any of those side effects anticipated? Do you know, like, were people talking about this? Or, I mean, I guess I don't know, it feels silly to worry about like, oh yeah, like my queer and trans podcast versus like stuff that's going to get people like actually legitimately hurt and killed. But it's just like ripple effects, right? Like people aren't thinking about the consequences of this.
It's a lot of censorship. And this censorship is happening across all channels, and it's affecting all different kinds of people, not just sex workers. It's even affecting like sex therapists.
Really? Tell me more about that.
Well, they can't advertise their, and it depends. There's different kinds of sex therapists. But there are some kinds of therapists that are more, I guess, hands-on, for lack of a better term. They can't advertise their services because it violates the terms of service of these platforms, and either algorithms will pull ads immediately, or their stuff gets reported and they get banned. And there's, sex workers, they find a way around this stuff. They make throwaways and they find places to advertise, but it's affected the Reddit community. There's a whole Reddit community, sub-communities, subreddits of sex workers, different kinds of sex workers, different kinds of things that are for sale, that are completely ethical, and a lot of them perfectly legal, can't advertise because somebody, a sex trafficker might use this verbiage to advertise these services. And it's very counterproductive, and it's made being a sex worker harder and more dangerous. And it's worth noting that Craigslist, Backpage, a lot of these platforms are compliant with law enforcement. So if law enforcement is like, we have this thing and we need this information, they turn it over. So if sex traffickers are using these platforms, then it's easier to catch them. If you drive them deeper underground, it's significantly harder.
And I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe the answer to this is obvious, but what is the answer, right? Like what should they have done instead of this?
Really, what this comes down to is, sex trafficking is bad. Sex work is not. So let's make one legal and one not, or one decriminalized. I'm more in favor of decriminalizing sex work. If you decriminalize sex work, then everybody who's doing it is able to then report to the police. They're able to operate in the light. They're able to report sex trafficking. The sex work community is protective of itself. And so if they see victims, they're going to report. They're going to want to say something. They're going to want to, they don't want to see people being trafficked in their community, in their profession. And a lot of the sex workers that I've made friends with and that I've networked with, they're all just, they're mothers, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're military wives. They're just normal people with what should be a normal profession. Mm-hmm. So if you can get sex workers to help these people, they will. But if they have to hide what they do because what they do isn't legal, then their hands are tied.
And of course, I mean, that obviously flies in the face of the stereotype, right? Because the stereotype is the sex worker is this like downtrodden, beaten down woman who doesn't want to be doing this and is amoral of some kind. And like, I feel like whenever laws are passed or policy is made, it's that in mind. Like anyone who is doing sex work of any kind is a victim and we need to save them, as opposed to like, these are professionals working in a profession that like sometimes is pretty harmless and sometimes might be a little dangerous. And so we just need to figure out how to protect them, just like we figure out how to protect construction workers from falling off a building. Like,
no, exactly. Sex workers need to be able to report people who are assaulting them or raping them or stealing from them. Sex workers, for the most part, I can almost guarantee anybody listening to this, at least one. You might not know it, but at least one sex worker. And maybe they just do it part-time. But they're just normal people. And sex work is just a normal job. You're using your mind and your body, and you are performing a service. And some people love their jobs, and some people just abide their jobs for a paycheck. And just like with any other job with sex work, there's aspects to it that are a chore that you don't really enjoy. But what people don't really think about is the chore part of that is usually like all the administrative stuff that people don't understand sex workers need to do, like the advertising, dealing with other sex workers sometimes, and the screening, and, essentially like the paperwork. Once you're with your client, it's usually a fair to good experience. If you have been able to screen and if you've been able to do the things that you need to do to protect yourself.
Yeah. And so I don't know, I feel like this is a good opportunity to pivot the conversation and just kind of talk about sex work more generally, because we've kind of already hit on that. But like when we talk about sex work, I feel like most folks, maybe not most folks, many folks have one very particular thing in mind, and that one very particular thing is only one small piece of what sex work actually is. So can you just kind of expound more generally on like what exactly we mean when we say sex work?
So I'm by no means a sex work expert. I've had some experience doing it. And I've had experience doing legal sex work. Because I am afraid of going to jail. But what they call like full service sex work, which is essentially the, sex for money, a typical what most people think of. And they call it full service because a lot of times it's a lot more than just sex for money. Clients want to talk. And they want to feel a connection. They want intimacy. If they just wanted an orgasm, they could jerk off. They're not coming to sex workers for orgasms. They're coming to sex workers for intimacy. They want to feel that connection. And they don't want any strings attached, for the most part. They want to feel something nice. They want to feel a human connection. And then they want to go on with their day or night or whatever. So that's a full service sex worker, and that's what most people think about, which in itself is misunderstood. And then there's probably more sex workers and kinds of them that I could even account for. There's fetish sellers, so people who sell things, parts of themselves. People sell like nail clippings, hair, bodily fluids of every single kind that you could think of. Literally. So you have your fetish sellers that sell things like that. Then there's, the used panty trope, which is very legitimate, and panty fetishes are hugely popular. And if you don't think that a panty fetishist, like 100 of them, I swear. Like so many guys are into it, and a lot of times they don't want to admit that they like it, but they like it. And again, they're selling intimacy. They're selling a part of themselves, something that's kind of private, usually, they're allowing their clients and their customers kind of into themselves a little bit. And that's part of what people pay for. You have people who sell sexting sessions with pictures, with Skype. You have cam models who do various kinds of things on camera. You have people who, I'm like trying to think of them all. You get into the BDSM aspect of it. So you get there's a lot of pro doms. Pro means paid, and then dom as in dominant. So you get a lot of pro doms, and within domination and BDSM, there's all kinds of things. You can do in-person domination, and in some states it's legal, in some states it's not. But you can do sessions, and domination and BDSM does not have to be sexual, but it can be sexual. And that's all about what you want to do as a professional, because as a professional, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You can tell a client no at any time. Or just say, I'm not the right person for you. You need to keep looking. And then there's just digital stuff. It's kind of like sexting with the BDSM aspect mixed in. There's something called GFE, which stands for girlfriend experience. So it's like what it sounds like. It's somebody who, provides a little bit more intimacy, and you get to negotiate what that means.
So it's a girlfriend RPG.
Yeah, it's a girlfriend RPG. Yeah. And it is the professional's job to make sure that things are fun, and that things are entertaining, and that, the client isn't getting hurt, like emotionally, because sometimes when you get into that level of intimacy,
boundaries can get fuzzy.
Yeah, boundaries can get fuzzy. So it's the professional's job to make sure that the client is happy, but also that they understand this is a fantasy, and, this is going to end. And as a professional, you might care about a client, but you care about them as a client.
Right.
They're a client. Just like with any other job, you can care for your clients, but at the end of the day, they're still clients.
And tell me about some of the ways that the internet makes it hard to exist as a sex worker, because I remember you and I were talking once, and you were telling a story about how, so technically PayPal doesn't allow payments for services like that, right? And so, I'm just sending money to a friend or something like that, and then the client will get mad at you and then report you.
Oh, yes. So this is actually, I've had a PayPal account shut down before because of this kind of thing. So PayPal is a little weird. They allow adult stuff, but it has to be physical goods. So and you have to have a tracking number, which I always did. So if I was sending something to somebody and I had a tracking number in a package, that could be disputable and you could win with PayPal, but they don't allow adult digital goods. Or
so no pictures, videos, that kind of stuff?
No pictures, no videos, no sexting, and no cam work. And that is a huge chunk of what you do as a sex worker, is those exchanges with clients. And so if you do this, if you make this sale with this client and something goes south, and they decide to report it as fraudulent, you get your money taken away and you have no recourse. And this isn't just PayPal, even though PayPal is notoriously aggressive for doing this. This is almost every payment platform has it in their terms of service that they don't allow that kind of thing, with the exception of Bitcoin. Pretty much the exception of Bitcoin. Now, you could get, money wired to you. You could get Western Union, that kind of stuff. But then that takes away your shield of anonymity. And that is very valuable as a sex worker, especially in the digital realm.
And so like to bring it back to what precipitated this conversation in the first place, one of the things that a lot of people are experiencing is like, where the hell is my money gone? And that's like another way that these things are all caught up in together, because this content, like, because I had the word pussy in my show notes, again, like that's the most likely explanation. Like it's now been, 13 days past my normal payment schedule. And this is happening to like, again, thankfully, like my rent isn't dependent on Patreon, at least like not yet, but for some people it is. And for folks who do sex work, I know a lot of people who do sex work initially might get into it because for some reason they can't hold down a quote unquote regular job, or their regular job doesn't pay enough, and so they do this for extra money, and so it's a lifeline source of income, right?
Oh yeah, it can definitely be a lifeline source of income. I say we, I mean like the sex worker collective. Unless it's like your full-time gig, we try to make it not, just because it fluctuates so much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could get a lot of clients. You could make an extra grand in a month, easy. And then it could be dry. You could make like $50 the next month and be, busting your ass just as hard as you were before. But yeah, it's hard. And if you're relying on that money, there's no protection for you. And a lot of times, once they find out that you're a sex worker, it's like they just don't give a shit about you or you getting your money. They just don't care.
And so, I mean, is there a recourse? Is there an alternative? Because again, like, I talk into a microphone for an hour a week, and like I make a little bit of extra money that I put back into the show. So like, if this were to all end tomorrow, I would be super devastated, but like I would be okay. And like this is affecting folks who are not in that fortunate position. And so like what are people doing? What's the alternative?
Well, a lot of times there's basically you're just kind of trying to migrate your accounts. So plenty of sex workers have PayPal, plenty of sex workers have Circle, Square, all different kinds of payment methods. And what you'll do is, and what you try to do, is you try to create space between your bank account and the way that you're collecting money. So you create buffers, which makes it harder for them to get the money back, and you don't let your money sit in that account. You transfer right over to your bank account. Even though PayPal has been known to pull that money out of your bank account if you have your bank account linked to your PayPal, which a lot of people do.
Wow.
Yeah, they are aggressive. So there's doing that, which is not advisable because you can always get caught. Mm-hmm. There's gift cards, which I may have used a lot of.
Yeah.
And sending gift cards is usually pretty safe and anonymous. And it's very difficult for the person, or it can be difficult for the other person to reclaim them. But you have to, again, there's so many rules. Like we have documents of just lists of these are the things that you do. You know that you're violating terms, but you're just basically trying to get away with it. If you want to be completely legit, there's cash. There's like Western Union. There's getting money wired into your account, which is dangerous because then you have to give out information. Mm-hmm. You don't usually want to give to clients. Bitcoin is anonymous, but that can be difficult to navigate because if you can't buy what you need to buy, if you need to pay your rent with Bitcoin, well, then you need to sell your Bitcoin to be able to convert it into actual usable money.
And hope the exchange rate's roughly the same so you're not losing out on that money.
Yeah.
And
Well, if you do it right away, if you're able to do it right away, it's usually okay. So there's that. And then also there are high-risk payment processors. which allow this kind of stuff. And I have been working with various high-risk payment processors. High-risk payment processors want $1,000 up front. And it's not just the processors, it's Visa and MasterCard want that up front. A lot of times they want there to be money available in the account in the case of chargebacks. And they charge a very high percentage. So
Because they can.
yeah, because they can. They say it's a high rate of chargebacks, and there can be a high rate of chargebacks with sex work, because you get, I don't know what you would call it, buyer's remorse.
Okay, so you're actually working on creating a platform that hopefully maybe addresses, solves, makes better, mitigates some of these issues. Tell me about that.
Yes, so I am hoping that it does it. The website is called, it's Fetsie. It's Fetsie.com, and it is a social media platform and marketplace, not just for sex workers, for sex positivity, for people in the sex service industry, sex workers, fetishists, anybody in that realm. I've had sex therapists come to me and ask me about it. I'd be interested in attracting sex worker-friendly attorneys, anybody that belongs in that sphere or can service that sphere. And I know that there are some platforms that are similar to this, but we plan to be different in a couple different ways. We don't plan on charging people to use the platform, and we don't plan on censoring our users in the way that some other platforms do that. We also plan on making sure, and to the best of our ability, that everyone using the platform is an adult. Because as much as I've talked about sex trafficking, as much as I've talked about how it can be difficult to operate as a sex worker, there are a lot of pedophiles that kind of lurk in these places. And children also end up on these places. They get curious, and and I say children, I mean not small, but like teenagers, and they have no idea that people are catfishing them. They have no idea that there are people, that there are predators looking to exploit them. So we plan to do something that no other platform does, and that is to verify ages of users if they want past a certain functionality. And the way that we plan on doing that while granting the most privacy to our users, even though this may sound counterintuitive, and I'll explain why it's not, is with ID verification. So like usually if you're going to an adult site, like for tobacco sales, they have a little checks box, are you 18? Yes, anybody can do that. Mm-hmm. And then usually also what they'll do is, like if you're trying to order something online, you'll have to give them your name, your real address, and often your social security number so they can do checks. And then they are able to verify that, because when they make the delivery person can only release it to that human being. Mm-hmm. It's possible for minors to get past this, even though it is difficult. However, you're asking for real names, you're asking for addresses, social security numbers, even though an ID, and I say ID, I mean like a government issued identification. Even though that seems intrusive, it's not, because the only thing that we need to see is your face and your birthday. That's it. We don't care what your real name is. We don't care where you live. We just need to make sure that you are an adult. And then we ask for another photo. So there's 2 photos, and that is of you. And then we ask you to do something to try and make it as unfakeable as possible. And we realize that these things are not foolproof, but it's a lot of hoops to jump through. And it is difficult to fake if you're a minor. And this sends a lot of messages. It sends messages to our users that we care that people are actually 18. It also sends messages to pedophiles that they can't find what they want on our site. And we have in our terms of service, we address pedophiles specifically. And we say that they're not allowed on our site, and that people who have been convicted of sex crimes with minors are not allowed on our site. So we're very strict on those fronts. And we're strict on those fronts to give our users freedom and flexibility once they get on our platform. And we do all this without getting paid, all for free. I mean, obviously, we have some ads on the site because we do need to generate some revenue, but we don't ask that our users pay for this.
Well, that's cool. And so, I mean, that circumvents a lot of the problems, because, like, you were saying, sometimes it just takes like, oh yeah, sure, I'm 18, I'll click this button, and so it is more difficult to fake. And I think it's an innovative solution to sort of mainstream that kind of stuff as much as you can within, like, whatever restrictions there are, based on the law and based on, like, payment processing and all of that, like all of those silly barriers that people put up. So, is it a site people can go to and sign up to now?
Yes. So we are in our beta testing. So pardon our dust, as it were. We're still getting a couple of things figured out, but you can go to our site. You can register now. Fetsie.com, FETSIE.com. And you can register now. Everybody who gets on the site has to be ID verified before we will approve their account. Once we open it up for everyone, people will be able to sign up without verifying, but they will have very limited functionality. And this is not just a social media site, this is also a marketplace. So people who sell services, and we have to limit it to legal services to protect ourselves, even though we advocate for expanding what that means, because we don't believe that any kind of consensual sex work should be illegal. So we do put that limitation on it. We have to, or else we just couldn't exist. But we have a free and open marketplace where people can post whatever they want. And that is, I mean, I don't know if you or if you realize, but a lot of the sites that kind of pander to sex workers are a little bit exploitive of them, because they'll be like, you can sell your panties and make an extra $500 a month without even trying. And that's just not how it works. And they charge you a monthly fee, whether you're making sales or not. You have to market, you have to work to be able to make those sales. And the sites don't explain that. They make it seem like it's really easy. And a lot of times they don't do reliable age verification. There have been sellers on some sites who are minors, which endangers the people who are buying from them, because they're buying fetish products from a minor. And we don't want that to happen either. And then you have some sites, for example, I'll talk about FetLife. On FetLife, if you have an abuser, you're not allowed to name your abuser. That seems completely counterproductive to a safe community. So there are some limits there. And on FetLife, you're not allowed to sell certain things either. So we're trying to be open and accepting, and we're trying to make, we're trying to, I guess, I know that fetish likes to live in the dark, but we're trying to bring it into the light as much as possible, and trying to destigmatize sex work, destigmatize fetishes, destigmatize any kind of sex-related professions, and promoting sex positivity.
And maybe slightly less consequentially, but like get us all fucking paid in the process, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, pussy should not be a blacklist word.
Right.
I have to wonder, though, that if you had penis in the notes, if you would have gotten like the same kind of thing.
It's great. If I can ever get Patreon support to email me back, I will most certainly ask that question. or I'll just make a complete ass of myself and ask it in public at their con.
There you go.
Just stand up and like, hey, CEO of Patreon, I got a question for you. Oh, that's exactly the kind of shit that I would do. Anyways, thank you for explaining all of this and bringing a little bit of light to it, because, from the outside, it seems like it kind of maybe seems like the company's just being really puritanical and kind of like brutal in their application of this stuff. But it's like, it almost like makes me feel bad for them now, because like they're being forced into this position, because it's like, if they screw up and let somebody slip through the cracks, like those folks could go to jail. So like, what else can they do? And so like, it's like this world created by this law that we're all sort of forced to live in, and like shit rolls downhill because, you know, they're still getting their money. I'm not getting mine. But I don't know. It makes me a little less hostile. I just wish they would answer my emails mostly. But thanks for explaining all of this stuff. Thanks for what you're doing with Fetsie. That's really cool. I'm going to have a link to the show notes. Anybody who's interested in checking it out, please do.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gay Theist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gay Theist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at GayTheistCali on Twitter, and you can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. We are a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gay Theist Manifesto. Make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.